In this week's show, we have friends of the show, Sam Granger and Joe Baylog, and we have a very interesting conversation about the great, the amazing, the smartest man in the world who has revolutionized the YouTube and Spotify and podcasting. They say that he's the number one source of information. He's become the new, what was the name of that guy? Jon Stewart, in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
because he's not only a comedian, he's a thinker and someone who's pushing the envelope and bringing interesting guests. And he pulls no punches. The great and the amazing and the comedian and MMA or whatever commentator, Joe Rogan. So as I decide to go after his eminence, I'm not coming after him as a person. I'm coming against what he said in the Tim Dillon show. I've been a fan of the comedian Tim Dillon for the last 8 months, and he is very um, outspoken and critical of all the vaccination mandates and issues with whatever's going on with COVID. He's also very funny at making fun of all kinds of famous people from both right and left. And that's why I think a lot of people like Joe Rogan, because he comes across as the man on the street, the all American dude who doesn't take BS from anyone. And he has become even more successful now that he has $1 million contract with Spotify. And as someone who has a Spotify membership, I'm very disappointed to see that they're still allowing for some of his um, interviews with very shady characters and giving a platform to people like Alex Jones, as well as other people who have good things to say. So it's not about the show itself. It's not about his format or him inviting multiple views or all kinds of people. It's about him using his ability to impact the culture to allow some of his friends and some of his people that help him get clicks to keep pushing and supporting ideas that are very problematic. So I know he's had conservative guys, he's had liberal guys, he's had people in between, but my specific issue with him is people like Alex Jones who have a very shady background and very problematic stance on everything. And you can say, and this is how a lot of entertainers get away with all kinds of stuff, is that they were just kidding, they were just trying to get a right side of the crowd, they were trying to make people think, and then they get away with all kinds of stuff. So we have, I'm going to let Sam give his opinion on his overall perspective on Joe Rogan's program and why he does what he does. And then I'm going to have Joe put the slammer on the Alex Jones controversy, because he has some really good stuff that I didn't even know of about how destructive and damaging some of these conspiracy theories can be. Go ahead, Sam.
So, I mean, I'm a longtime listener of Joe Rogan, and what's happening now with people saying that, he's misinformation and he should be canceled, he should be deplatformed, all this kind of stuff. I gotta say that Joe is he's been consistent for, this decade or so that he's been doing podcast, where he hasn't flip-flopped his opinion on things. He's approached arguments in consistent ways for a long time. And it's just right now they happen to be talking about COVID and transgenderism and, things that are hot button issues now. And so they think that he has a reactionary opinion to these current, social trends or these current sociological trends. We got to talk about these things because they're happening right here and right now. And so they think he takes, just this one side of things, to be contrarian. And I'm just I've been listening for, the better part of a decade. And just because this might be the first time you're catching an episode from him doesn't mean he's just doing this spin like this. Because I think all of his arguments come from the same place. They're of the same cloth. He doesn't lie and he doesn't All he does is ask questions of guests. And I think by having people like Alex Jones and Bob Lazar and, a bunch of controversial figures on there, what ends up happening is the arguments are brought into the open air that you can listen to or not. You can agree with them or not, but it's at least free speech. And I think like it's good to just get these conversations out in the open air, because it doesn't matter if facts are wrong or something like that. As long as people can question facts, as long as he's allowed to ask questions, as long as we're allowed to question him, free speech keeps rolling and we all keep learning. If we were to try and shut down his podcast or shut down his ability to ask questions of people, then I think we're the fascists.
Okay, well, before we go to Joe, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, Sam. How much money is Joe Rogan paying you to defend him on my show?
Zero, but I'll take a kettlebell if he's got one.
When did the CIA sign you up to become an informant and someone who spreads misinformation by supporting Joe Rogan?
Let's see. When was the last time I was on this podcast? It was around this time.
So you see, I'm just asking questions.
Well, it was because your podcast wasn't paying enough, so I had to go to
right.
his.
I'm not making any accusations. I'm just asking questions.
Careful, David. Careful. What kind of questions you ask? What manner? Be specific.
So that's the thing. We can always play dumb and say, well, I'm just asking questions. I had a friend that he would say horrible, offensive things, but he would always put in a question. So I'll be like, Joe, I know that you and Hillary Clinton have been eating babies. How long have you guys been doing that?
3 years. Can you imagine if we did?
So I'm not
Right,
kind of political ascendancy we would have.
When you frame a question like that, it begs the answer, because you plant in someone's mind, that this person is guilty of whatever charge that you put them at. So like, I have to first of all deny that I have any involvement with the CIA, or I have to deny that I have any connection with Joe, because you've already planted.
All I did was type Alex Jones, Joe Rogan on Spotify, and there's a clip that says, for 41 minutes, Alex Jones speaks on Illuminati agenda on Joe Rogan's podcast. And then he talks about the whole, most likely it's true, the thing with Joe Biden's son's laptop. Then there's another one, Alex Jones on Bohemian Grove, Skull Bones, and Epstein. And then it just keeps going. So the most disturbing thing about the Tim Dillon interview, and if anybody's interested, it's on YouTube, and it's also on the Tim Dillon podcast. Well, he actually deleted it from the Tim Dillon podcast, so I'm surprised he did that. He said, this is what Joe Rogan said, and I quote, he said, almost everything that Alex Jones has said up until he was deplatformed has been true. Almost everything.
Yeah. So the Illuminati stuff, then he would agree with implicitly.
So Illuminati, Trump is the greatest man that ever lived. Whatever Joe Biden is supporting, whatever the hell his son is doing, and most likely that one's true.
They're turning the frogs gay. Yeah.
According to Joe, that is true. Joe, tell us about the frogs truly losing their sexuality.
So what I was telling you the other night was just that the whole, not the epidemiology, the environmental problem is that, and Sam knows as well too, the sex change thing is an environmental fact, but the cause of that is a lot to do with pollution, things we put in the environment, and estrogen levels and all of that, because of the stuff that we make. It either directly or indirectly ends up in the environment somehow, and it changes the genetics. And amphibians are actually particularly sensitive to it because they are both in the water and in the ground. So they have two areas of exposure that they can get to, and they have, films that basically cover them. And so toxins are able to leak through them quite easily.
And they breathe
also
through their skin.
Right. They breathe through their skin. So they're, I don't even know, probably a good test subject. Fish are also a good one. Birds are highly studied.
These same microplastics that are affecting their sexuality is what we have, in our heatable dinners, like the frozen bags that you steam in, or the frozen foods that you cook in the plastic in the microwave. That stuff leaches into our food, and then we eat it. And those are also attested to facts. And so whatever, maybe people laughed at it when Alex Jones said it, first of all, but the more research that's done on phthalates and these microplastics, the more people are like, yeah, BPA is not good. Yeah, what's the stuff in the river?
None of that stuff is new.
PFAS, yeah.
PFAS, yeah. That's why we started moving away from plastic water bottles. It was a big thing because the EPA finally came out. I was like, oh yeah, this is a bad thing. And then everybody's like, yeah, it's a bad thing. And then we started doing it. But
I knew that frogs can turn female or male from Jurassic Park in 1991 when I read the book.
That's it.
But Michael Crichton didn't say the frogs are turning gay. So you can say the approach of Alex Jones is to be a jackass about it. And to be,
right. Yeah, I mean, it turns into a soundbite,
But for Joe Rogan to say that he's a truth teller and that he's a prophet that has foreseen things, I just read episode 14, not about interdimensional vampires. And this is somehow one of Alex Jones made it into Spotify. And he's having a rant about how there's something about interdimensional vampires. So is he a lunatic or is he a saint? Because Joe Rogan paints him as a very nice guy. The only reason he came after the children and the parents of Sandy Hook is because he was having an emotional breakdown. And Joe knows more about this than I do. So for someone as influential as Joe Rogan to be the mouthpiece or the PR guy for Alex Jones, to me, that's the problem. If when I used to watch Jon Stewart, I hated him for having Bill Clinton on and giving him softball questions, and also for treating Obama like he was an idiot, even though they were both Democrats. Jon Stewart showed his true colors of how partisan and how favoritist he was towards some Democrats and others. And I lost respect for him, and I didn't really care about his show after that. Now, Joe Rogan, who has had good interviews, his interview of Bernie Sanders was fantastic. I've never seen someone be so interested and willing to hear him out, especially in the culture we live in, where nobody can be a socialist. If you're a socialist, might as well be a friend of Satan. And everybody says that Joe Rogan was a sincere, whatever liberal Democrat or something to support him, and people were mad that he didn't support Hillary or Joe Biden or anybody else. So in some senses, Joe can be a hero, but when it comes down to Sandy Hook and supporting a guy that came after families and who was a provocateur causing more pain and more trauma for those families, I want you, Joe, to tell us what do you know about his involvement in trying to attack in either internet or just getting people riled up against the victims of Sandy Hook.
Well, so first of all, after watching that podcast, I got a little bit more context of what Alex Jones was going through at that time. Let's just assume that all that's true. Which would indicate a couple of things, because he said something interesting too. Well, I'm trying to remember exactly where he said that, but he said something interesting about him having a psychotic breakdown sometime after that, which personally I think is probably a good thing. just because it'll probably lighten them up a little bit. But so the Sandy Hook
You're
thing.
talking about Alex Jones, right?
Right. So Joe Rogan brought up a good point too, that yeah, he totally effed up, right? That was a big F up. But Alex Jones basically went on the air and just ranted about, and it was like sometimes shortly after it happened. You know, this is not like, he went on and he just kind of lambasted a bunch of people, and said, you know, this whole thing's been faked. The families who are involved should be ashamed of themselves. The kids are lying. No one died. No one got shot. You know, the whole thing is just a made-up conspiracy theory. And then, of course, he ties in some political agenda to say, you know, oh, it's to try to prove this point. Now, granted, coming from my generation, watched 9/11 happen,
Hold on,
I don't
Joe.
believe a lot of
We're
stuff.
about to get kicked out. I'll send you guys a new link. So sorry.
Oh, okay, bye.
Okay. So,
Um,
you were saying that in our age, what happened? What?
Oh, so I was trying to give context of my perspective that, so I don't know, this might be super different, not even important at all, but having been really young, watched 9/11 happen, and then following, because growing up with the internet, you learn about everything way too quickly. So you find out about the conspiracy theories, so everything becomes under suspect, and you lose trust in the system. So you kind of understand where someone like Alex Jones comes from, even though he's, what, 2 generations above me, in the sense that his whole thing is like everything is conspiracy, right? Like everything is under scrutiny. Everything's subject to just review and just an immense amount of research, which isn't probably necessary. So when he came out about Sandy Hook and he's just talking and going off, and he's like showing pictures of the people and the scenes and everything, and you're like, dude, take it easy. And it's like you could tell like he was just off kilter. Like he's off his rocker, he's on edge, and it's like something is going on with him. It's like, it's just a strange thing to pick out and to be like, okay, this is what the government wants you to believe is really happening in our country. And like statistically speaking, the number of shootings that's gone in schools, middle schools, high school is probably less. I don't know, but number of shootings has dramatically increased. So when I was in middle school, grade school, when what was the first big
Columbine?
When Columbine happened, right? The number of shootings has only increased since then every year. It's insane. And so then he picks this one thing, which is like statistically proven that this is a terrible thing that's happening. It's like, nah, this one's not real. And then, you know, just gets personal. And yes, so his followers went out there and started going after the family members and telling this, the story I heard was on NPR, I think. Yeah, it was on NPR. And it was a good follow-up because it was with the guy who was the father of one of the kids. And the dad got, you know, hate mail and just all this crap and it's not real and you're hiding and all this stuff. And so the dad had to move to a different state and like 3 or 4 times and, you know, try to push back, and he got lawyers and fought everybody on Facebook and all that, and tried to get the right story out there. Because that's what Joe Rogan goes back to. It's like, it's kind of about the narrative that you follow. And
right, but Alex Jones came on the Joe Rogan podcast to apologize for that misinformation.
After he got sued.
What?
After he got sued.
After Alex Jones got sued?
Yeah, so an apology after you get in trouble is not a good apology at all.
Well, I mean, could he have been as disinformed? It's not like he was lying. Was it?
He was accused.
I was assuming a guy going through a psychotic break, he's seeing things that aren't there. He's putting together the dots in a way that's not correct. And when he got his head screwed on straight, he went on Rogan and...
Never had his head screwed on straight.
What's that?
He's never had his head screwed on straight. Like in 2003, I saw him in the movie Waking Life, and he was the hero of the liberals because he was the only guy who was ranting about the government being in our lives. And you know how if you go towards the left, they hate the government too, but they hate them for different reasons because they're not doing enough to help the people. And if you go towards the right, they hate the government because they're too involved. So in the Austin crowd, who were all drug addicts in that movie, they had him on as a special, representative of the man, or not the man of the common people, and now he's the representative of the far right. And so is he insane or is he an opportunist? Because you're saying that he came back to his true self, which is a normal human being, and I've never seen him act normal. So where are you getting this from?
Well, what I'm trying to say is that he wasn't putting things together on that issue correctly. Once he was reconciled with reality and was at least putting the Sandy Hook stuff together, he came on and he owned that. But, I don't think that, I think it's better that these conversations be had in public because you're held accountable when you have these conversations in public. Alex Jones was held accountable because he had that conversation in public, which started a debate about whether or not he was right or wrong. And we got to the truth, and he submitted to that truth as well. And it's only because that conversation could be happening in the open air that both we and Alex Jones got to the truth on the Sandy Hook thing, and that it did happen, and that the families were affected, and he needs to repent of, being so off the rails on that one, which he did.
What is Joe's view of QAnon? Joe Rogan. Has he ever had?
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, he had somebody on there who did the QAnon documentary.
Okay. The guy.
What is that?
Which one?
There's
an HBO 3-part documentary about QAnon where they went back to the guy who started it and all that. Was that?
Yeah. That he had the director of that on his show.
Because I want to take it back to 1990 or whatever, when Alex Jones did his mockumentary on the Bohemian Grove, and to me that is the root of the QAnon conspiracy. So again, I've done a show called Alex Jones and Joe Rogan and Conspiracies, and I had one of Joe Rogan's guests, who just happens to be one of our ongoing guests in my show, where he felt that he was edited in a non-favorable way in the short version of his interview. And he got into it with Joe Rogan because he said that Joe Rogan was a conspiracy promoter in Hollywood. And then Joe Rogan had him on and said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you've been pushing 9/11 conspiracies, and that's not responsible." And then they went back and forth for 3 hours. But the reason that I bring Bohemian Grove, and again, the show is called Joe Rogan is Lying. I'm not saying that he should be canceled. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have, public conversation. I'm not saying that that freedom of expression should be oppressed. What I'm saying, talking about accountability, that is, if someone makes accusations that are far-fetched, they should not be given a platform in a very influential show, because you're giving them legitimacy. So in 1990,
well, no. Here, I'm gonna say that he's not. You can't call him a liar, because in order to be a liar, you need to be making statements. And largely, Joe doesn't. Let me rephrase that. Rogan doesn't make statements. He just asks questions.
On Tim Dillon's show, he said, almost everything that Alex Jones has said has become true. That is a lie.
Is it though?
It is. It's a complete lie. Because
well, I'll give you that the guy talks a lot and spreads a lot of information. So he's said a lot of things. So maybe the percentage is, like a handful of them are right. But, a handful of those were really important things,
Do you remember the video? I don't know if you guys saw it, or the photo of Alex Jones on top of an army vehicle during the January 6th or one of those rallies with a megaphone screaming at the top of his lungs, uh,
Yeah.
take it back, and whatever. Like, what is the chant of the January 6th thing that
Oh
the
yeah.
stolen?
I don't know.
He was in a tank, spreading falsehood at that point, and it all goes back to QAnon, and it all goes back to Bohemian Grove, because according to this type of thinking, Trump is not the kind of president that would go hang out in Bohemian Grove with all the other liars and child abusers and eaters of babies. So how can someone as influential as Alex Jones, who was able to spearhead not only demonic, but it also has like anti-Semitic connotations, and I'll get there. Like, he spearheaded this idea that all the presidents are Illuminati, and then pushed it so long that now you have other provocateurs and other disingenuous people pick it up and turn it into a thing such as QAnon, and then he's still being given a platform, and he's still being treated like royalty, with Tim Dillon and Joe Rogan, who don't see the evil behind this. To accuse people who are running the government that they've been doing effigies to Molech, the god of the Canaanites, that murder children, and all kinds of crazy stuff that comes from Texe Marks, who's a crazy preacher that died in Texas. It's weird that Joe Rogan moved to Austin, where Alex Jones and Texe Marks were. So that's something weird too. And now he's still being given this ability to speak and make all kinds of crazy propositions. That to me is very problematic. And to say that it's just one perspective, or that he throws poop at the wall, and it turns out that half of the poop that he throws ends up being true and it sticks to the wall. Like, come on, man. Like, so let's go after other conspiracy theories and say, well, maybe in the long run, in the next 50 years, we'll find out that it was Bush and Cheney that blew up the towers. Like, come on, man. Like, to me.
Well, David, I mean, can you really be criticizing Joe Rogan for putting crazy people on his platform when you have a podcast where a bunch of non-mainstream people have come on to talk about various religious ideas that you are opposed to?
I give people who I believe have something to say an opportunity, but I've never had a Nazi on. I've never had people who are hateful and destructive. Like, I've had the opportunity to have 9/11 people, and I was like, I am not even gonna give them an opportunity, because we're just gonna start making all kinds of accusations. There's no evidence, and then they're gonna say, well, the reason there's no evidence is because the government is hiding it. And it's like, that's really the problem. Someone like Alex Jones will tell you that all his crazy stuff has the burden of proof is that there is no proof, like the alien guys. That like, we know that the aliens are out there, but the government is hiding it. So it creates a paranoid perspective that it doesn't help anyone. So if we go to the basics of just civility, what good do all these things do? Nothing. They might be entertaining, they might be interesting, but they actually have repercussions in the real world, such as the guy that went and tried to shoot the pizza parlor guy, such as people who have attacked different minorities because they think that the Chinese or the Muslims or the Mexicans are trying to take over. So when you start pushing all these agendas, and there's actually many Alex Joneses. There's a guy that has a show called Ground Zero, and he says all kind of crazy stuff too. There's quite a few people who have taken that approach for clicks or for getting a lot of commercials, and that is the almost like the model that they're using. So I just think that.
But if we're talking about, if the subject matter, like for instance, COVID, vaccines, transgenderism, these are things that are unquestionable. Like, literally, you cannot raise a question on certain platforms without being taken down. Mm-hmm. Now, he has an immutable position where he's untakedownable from Spotify's contract with him and such. And so the thing there is, shouldn't we be allowed to ask questions of unquestionable things? You know, if you have the platform to.
Joe Rogan, Jimmy Dore, and whoever else is out there questioning the whole COVID-19 response and narrative are very brave. So I'll give you that. If Joe Rogan would shut up about Alex Jones and all the other people who are destructive to society, he should get a prize for being one of the strong voices against the mandates, against the way that people have been mistreated. I know people from Australia that they get a ticket if they leave their house because they've been mandated to stay home. And I would never like for the U.S. to turn into that, but I know in California and New York they were heading in that direction, or chasing people down who were, contact tracing. That if they knew that you were somewhere and you were sick, that you're going to get in trouble. Like I appreciate that our brave podcasters and social commentators who are addressing those issues. But again, it's like you lose credibility when you start hanging out with the Alex Jones types. It's like when I first met my wife, she was quoting Michael Moore as a proponent of Medicare for all and one of the only voices out there who cared about people's health. And I told her, you have the right points, but you have the wrong allies. Do not quote Michael Moore. The moment you quote Michael Moore, you've lost half of the room because he's a clown. And the same would be, Joe Rogan. You are very sincere. You're very smart. You have a lot to say, but don't hang out with lunatics like Alex Jones that take away a lot of your credibility.
Right, but actually, he's exercising the same virtue in both places, where he's openly asking people questions, and no matter whether it's Alex Jones or Peter McCullough or Robert Malone or Blair White, like it doesn't matter who we're talking about. There are people that are on his show and I don't like them. And I don't like that he interviewed them or something because they personally annoy me, or I know that they're so off base that I just don't even want to listen to a word that they say. But I respect the fact that he treats them all the same. You're on my show, I'm going to ask questions about you, and we're going to, not necessarily get to the truth, but I'm going to let you express yourself freely, however you need. And so, like, I can't say that he's wrong to do that with some people I don't like, but it's okay if he does it with people that I do like. He procedurally works in an egalitarian way with no matter who's on his show, he's going to have a legitimate conversation with them. And so I think you have to laud the virtue with everyone.
Let me ask you this, since you're more familiar with the show. Does he challenge everyone equally? Because one of my issues with Trevor Noah and Stephen Colbert is they have become institutionalists. So if Hillary Clinton shows up, they're very sweet and very kind and very supportive of her. And when this was like at the height of all of us knowing that Hillary Clinton had a lot of problems, he never questioned her. The same with Stephen Colbert. Does Joe Rogan know, or even if he doesn't agree with the audience or with the world, does he know to say, hey, Alex, you said some really messed up stuff. Where are you getting this from? Does he actually do that? Because I would like for him to be in that type of, if he was truly a journalist, which he's not, he would try to be a little more investigative if he was a good journalist. Have you experienced
Right, but like, listen, he's not a journalist. He is primarily two things. He's primarily a fighter, and he trained people in Taekwondo in Boston. He is into MMA commentary. He's rolling jiu-jitsu all the time. So primarily he's a fighter. Keep that in mind. And secondarily, he's a stand-up comedian. Now, both of those professions are about they're about argument. They're about, knowing your defenses and, catching people off guard, exposing people, their vulnerabilities. A fighter looks for your vulnerability so they can exploit it and submit you or hurt you or whatever. A comedian looks for your vulnerabilities because that's where they put a punchline. They get you to laugh at the uncomfortable thing, And so he does both of those things. So when he brings a guest on, what he's trying to do is he asks them questions very directly and very straightforwardly. There are a lot of the questions that anyone would ask them. Everyone would want to ask a doctor, can you get COVID twice? And they want a straight answer. And it's by his good questioning that he doesn't strengthen their argument per se, but he allows them, he's exposing what we would think the vulnerabilities are. And sometimes people answer well, and sometimes people, don't have a good answer. But he's always asking the right questions and always pushing people. I don't see him taking it easy on his friends. If anything, if you look at some of his comedian friends that he has on there, he really leans into them and he really pushes into them and he really counters them. So I think he's oppositional, in a constructive way where he can play devil's advocate. He can, he's not giving softball questions.
Well, it's good to hear that, because that's the biggest problem, that once people are doing well, they want access to major figures. So Tim Dillon had another guy who has interviewed Elon Musk, and I could care less about that guy. Everybody keeps saying he's so cool and he's so rich and stuff like that. It's I don't want to know anything about him, and I don't want to hang out with him, and he doesn't mean anything to me. But to everybody else, he's such a successful guy. So if he one day, I just happened to have him on my show, I would have no bones in asking him, hey, why are you wasting your time sending rockets to the moon when you could be helping people in the world? That's something that I would say. But someone who wants to go smoke weed with him and, drive around in his nice car, they might not ask that. So have you ever seen him just be completely blunt and say, well, in a question form, because you don't have to be confrontational, you can say, some people say that you are part of the Illuminati. What would you say in response to that? And maybe he believes that they're the Illuminati and he wants to know. Have you ever seen him do that? Bring up what some detractors would say about some famous person that everybody's in love with, but people like us might not care for.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't give you any specific examples off the top of my head, but I mean, he's consistently allowing people to take control of the record, or contribute to the record, I should say, where he'll say, some people thought this about you. Is there anything that you want to say to them, or whatever? And he does allow those people to say that, and he can push back on them at times, but I don't have a specific example for you.
What about you, Joe Bay? Have you heard or seen anything that you would see as him being a voice for the people? Because another issue that happens is that once you get involved with politicians and famous folks, they all have groupthink, we need to support Biden, or we need to support Trump, or we need to do this and that. And again, I have a lot of respect for Joe Rogan, because he was standing up for Bernie when nobody else was. Have you seen him be a consistent defender of the little man when he's rubbing shoulders with all these successful folks?
I can't say that because I haven't watched enough of his show to get a good view of who he is and how he presents himself in public. But just from watching a few episodes of him, he seems to be on the side of the people, in the sense that, okay, so this is getting back to the COVID stuff a little bit. He's become sort of the spokesperson for the dissenting opinion, or more specifically for the dissenting narrative, that all this stuff we've been fed by the government isn't true, that they don't even believe themselves, but they're caught up in whatever, so they don't even know what to say. And then all the other alternatives, the fact that he is pretty open about his own story, sharing where he came from, his background. He's chatting with his buddy Tim Dillon on, where he came up from in the fighting world, things he's done, crap he used to do. He's what's the word? So he's self-deprecating. He's not unwilling to say things, talk about the bad things that he's done, and to come to grips with them, and to say, okay, I did this, and this is what I was saying at the time, and here's how I changed. I became a better person because of this. So that, again, that sort of like human speak, he's telling his own narrative, makes him much more accessible and open to other people who are interested in that. Now, granted, there are a large majority of the population which disagrees with the COVID narrative that he's giving, so the counter narrative, right? And I still want to believe in that everything you get from the media is true, everything about vaccines is great, everything I've ever been told from anybody my entire life has always been true. There's lots of people who are still that way, I worked with a guy that was like that at a factory that I worked in, and he would just like rant on our lunch breaks and be like, people should be wearing their masks all the time, and I can't believe this. And he's he's just kind of kvetching, which is a great word, about other people, and that's a normal human thing to do, to complain about others. It kind of makes us human. But the counteracting of these two narratives and putting them all together and having communication and conversations with people, I think is something that he does pretty well. I mean, again, he brings in all these different people with dissenting voices on his show. He, tries to bring up good questions. He tries to ask, those more difficult things. And then, does he speak for everybody though? No, because not everybody's opinion. He said it on I don't know if it was the Tim Dillon show. Yeah, he said it then. He said, we're in the opinion business, something like that. He said, we're in the business of sharing opinions. And so not everybody shares that opinion. So we're going to disagree, and that's life. It's just, but he brought up the really good point of not everybody's willing to share their opinions, especially now with, COVID stuff, or with just people being unwilling to speak up and being able to share what they think. Because, he brought it back to corptocracy, which was really good. Because everybody's in a very bureaucratic mindset, and he used the example of HR. Everything's being documented, everything you say is going to be recorded. So you don't want to lose your job if you speak out your opinion, which is that. I mean, that's kind of another rabbit trail we could go down, but that's useful, at least, because it brings up, at least for a middle section of, I don't even know how many people would be, of the American population that does live and work in corporations and is definitely interested in a suburban life. The sense that, sharing your opinion, what's the two biggest things that you cannot talk about at Christmas and Easter and Thanksgiving? You cannot talk about religion and politics. Why? Because it brings up people's opinions fundamentally. And then you have differences of opinions, and then you get into arguments, and then things get heated, and then Uncle Jerry's throwing the beer, and then people are fighting, and then you're like, okay, why am I? And because it was supposed to be just a nice, calm thing that we have to do together, but we don't really care about what people's opinions are. So the healthier thing, the more human thing to do, is to share your opinions more outright, and to not really care. But you got to be sensitive, to who you're sharing them with. So does he speak for everybody? No, I don't think he's necessarily a populist. He might be. He seems sort of hard to place him in the middle of the line. But he came up, and has his own story of, he didn't necessarily come from nothing. It wasn't like Martin Luther King's story or something, where it's like, grew up in the streets. But I don't know the details of his life, so maybe it is,
Because the reason I ask is because I have a friend who he tried to start a video series, and we've been talking through the whole time that I've been doing my podcast on what makes a show successful, or how do you get to that place. Maybe not the Joe Rogan number one in the world in news and entertainment, but how do you get to a place of stability and keeping your show, making a living or whatever from your projects? And we were talking about how you need to have either a following, like I guess Joe Rogan already had a following, or at least he was known before he got his podcast going. I remember watching him in Fear Factor and stuff like that. So I when I first heard his name, I didn't know who he was, and then once I saw him, I was like, oh yeah, the guy from Fear Factor. You also have to have a personality, an interesting story that the people connect with, and then or a product or something that you have contributed to society. So if you wrote a book that is a bestseller or something like that, then you have an automatic platform because people want to know more. You have something to say. If you're very engaging and entertaining, then people are going to keep listening. And if you are someone that is known and liked, then you're also going to have a following, and it might even grow. So again, a lot of kudos to him for his success and for his openness. The one thing we see in the Tim Dillon interview is that he's very open about who he is and where he comes from and how he feels about things. And the part that I also respect is that he says that you have to be able to speak your mind. You shouldn't be afraid of how people are going to react and judge you for it. And so comedians have always had that ability of being very free. That they'll say what everybody else is thinking and put it out there, and they shouldn't be persecuted for their opinions. So Sam, I know as we've been discussing this, you brought up censorship and canceling people and stuff like that. Do you feel that that's what has made him successful? That he doesn't really care what people think, and that he's able to speak his mind. And we live in a society that has become very controlling and very limiting, and that takes away our human spirit and our ability to explore.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's fitting that we have such reverence right now for comedians. I really think that comedians are the prophets of a secular world. You don't have a prophet, who's talking to God and doing outlandish things, like walking around the streets naked to point out your insecurities or something, like, or to roll around in a bunch of dung, like the prophets in the Old Testament did really ridiculous things that were contrary to the culture. To call them out and to say, hey, maybe you should change your life. The comedians are the closest thing that we have to a prophet right now, because they're also like the jester in the king's court. And it's only the jester who can tell the truth, because he's the only one who can talk back to the king. Everyone else needs to be part of the bureaucratic structure of having a carrot incentivizing you to go in the way of the powerful, and then the powerful also give you a stick on the other end to make sure that you aren't going against them. Now, a comedian, it's their job to expose insecurities and make us laugh about them and point out the ridiculous and the absurd that we have in life. And so that means that they're going to say things that turn the mirror around on us, and we notice our vulnerabilities and our insecurities. They bring that into relief with us, and they also do that to people in positions of power as well, to humble them as well. So that's the duty that I think that Joe Rogan and some of these other comedians have, and what they're entrusted with. And because also jokes only work when they're true, you know, because like a punchline and an insight both hit you in the same way. Like we don't laugh at things just because they're absurd or they're crazy, you know, and that's just dumb. It's not really funny. But when someone says something really funny, you're like, oh my God, that's so true. And so that's why I think, you know, we really need to preserve the comics' free speech and their ability to preserve or to interact with the world on any angle they need, because at the end of the day, the comedian is trying to expose the truth.
I'm glad you say that, because there was one point where more people got their news from the Daily Show than from the nightly news, and it was for the same reason that, as they talk about it in that interview with Tim Dillon and Joe Rogan, that everything is so scripted. Um, you know that every time you turn on the news, they're gonna say 5 horrible things that happened today, and then now let's go to a picture of a puppy, and then let's do weather, and then let's do sports.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is when you toggle between the news stations, local news all across the board, you know, you go from the news in Texas to the news in Michigan to the news in New York, you know, and then you also take the national level things like CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. You'll notice that they're all using the same script. You're hearing the same verbiage. You're hearing the same phrasings all across. Everyone's using the same phrases, like out of an abundance of caution, or as the CDC says, you know, like all of that stuff is so scripted in that environment. And so when you have a 3-hour long discussion where this guy is grilling his guests and asking them questions and going down the rabbit holes with them, it's very hard to lie for 3 hours straight. And so the truth comes out in those podcasts, you know, more so than they can come out in a 5-minute quick pre-scripted thing that's regurgitated through everyone's local news stations. And so I think that's one reason why, you know, Joe Rogan, I mean, if he has, you know, like 90 million people or something like that who are listening to him all the time, Tucker Carlson and these guys, they only have like 3. I mean, it's not even close, you know, how much people value his opinion compared to the other pundits who are on TV. Because, you know, even the most outlandish people on there are still hyper scripted.
Definitely, and the 2-minute or responses gives a lot to say for these crazy interviews that they do, where they'll have a pundit talk for 2 minutes on whatever just happened, and they'll give you a canned answer, and then they have another pundit give you another canned answer, and there's really no back and forth, and there's really no deeper understanding of the issues. So again, there's maybe a few more things we could talk about, but we're running out of time. I want to thank you both for being on this critique of the Tim Dillon interview of Joe Rogan, and maybe later we can talk more about other subjects that are coming up. We've done a couple of shows on COVID. We've done a couple of shows on conspiracy theories, but most of all, we support free speech, and we support the ability to get your message across. So they say that a way to fight bad information is with good information. So we hope that that can happen. So maybe people are writing papers about Medea movies and stuff like that. Maybe Sam, Joe, and I can write a book about how Joe Rogan has revolutionized podcasting and brought truth, and he's the greatest jester that ever lived, or the lousiest, or whatever. It's funny how you can analyze anything that is out there, but I think that that's also part of the conversation, that once you put something out there, it's also going to be criticized, it's going to be thought about, and it's going to be broken apart and dissected. And I hope people will appreciate this, us doing that in this program. Thank you, Joe and Sam.
All right. Thanks, David.
Talk to you guys soon.
All right. Ciao.
Yeah.
Take care. So thanks a lot, guys.